What's going on, guys? The original Mako back with some more Gunfire Reborn content. This is going to be a pretty quick, pretty short video. Just a real quick tips and tricks video on elemental effects and elemental fusion and how all of that works. I'm just going to be kind of talking about it while there's some gameplay going on in the background. So if you need help with it or want to understand it a little bit better, this is the video to go to. I'm going to be explaining all three elemental effects and what they do, and then what happens when you combine them to create the fusion effects that are pretty awesome in the game and can certainly make lower tier weapons worth it if they have that elemental effect on them. So if you want to watch any sort of Gunfire Reborn runs live or Risk of Rain runs live, make sure to check me out at Twitch, twitch.tv/theoriginalmako. The link will be in the description as always. And then also, like I've started doing, I'm going to be covering some Godfall content and news. Not content, because the game's not out until holiday season. But if you want to catch more of that, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel to get all of your rogue fill needs, or all of your roguelike needs, or your fill of roguelike content. I don't know what I was going for. I kind of combined things there. But yeah, let's just go ahead and hop into it. I'm going to be talking about it while we go through this, or while there's just some gameplay in the background. So yeah, let's hop into it. The first elemental effect is Corrosion, which can inflict Decay. Now, there's a very important distinction I want to start off by making here. When you have an elemental weapon, it has whatever percent chance. Let's say it's 20% chance to inflict an elemental effect. An elemental effect does not mean, like, corrosion weapons are good against enemies with the yellow shield, okay? But the elemental effect chance doesn't mean that only 20% of the time it's going to be effective against that shield. It means all the time it'll be effective against the shield, and occasionally it can inflict a status effect that is called Decay. And Decay, all it does is it makes enemies move slower, or if you get caught in corrosion, it makes you move slower. So Decay is a pretty useful effect for a lot of different enemies, making them move slower. Mostly, I'd say the desert and last stage on the ships, or not on the ships, but on like the beach and stuff, are where that's going to come in most handy. But it's a very good effect. It's really useful. Having a high corrosion chance, meaning you're just slowing down every enemy. Especially for melee enemies like those spearmen, it's just really important and can be a good way to up your chances of winning a run by just slowing down your enemies, giving you better chance to dodge and avoid their attacks. Next on the list is fire weapons, which I currently have one of right now, the Crimson Fire Scale, which can inflict burning. Now, once again, fire weapons are good against enemies that don't have a shield. And if it has a chance to inflict burning, like I guess I can go ahead and actually give an example after I clear this room here. When it says it has a chance to inflict burning, that doesn't mean it has a chance to be better against enemies without a shield. It's always better against enemies without a shield, and occasionally will burn them. So let me just go ahead and clear this. Kind of, oh my gosh, so many enemies in this room. So it has a 12% to deal burning effects. Now let me pull this up real quick so you can see. Okay, so fire is a damage type. It deals 50% extra damage to standard health. And every hit has a percentage chance to inflict burning, which deals ticks of damage to the target over time. So, once again, the fire damage type will always be good against the standard health enemies, but it also has a 12% chance to inflict burning, which will do damage over time to the enemies. So that's very important if you're trying to kill things quicker. In Risk of Rain talk, it'd be like doing a bleed effect. So the enemy's just going to continually take damage over time, which once again, that's never a bad thing at all. All it does is help you, and it's just better than weapons that don't have it, or that don't have any elemental effect chance. So when given a choice, always take a weapon that has an elemental effect chance, unless you're going for a specific synergy, or you already know what you're building. If you get one early in the game, I would just highly recommend taking it. Why did I switch? Because having elemental effect is just always better than not having elemental effect. And the last standard elemental effect is the shock elemental effect, which once again, shock does increase damage to blue bar enemies 100% of the time, and it has a chance, let me just make sure I'm on the right thing here, it has a chance to inflict, or lightning damage always does good against blue bar enemies, and it has a chance to inflict what's called shock. And shock, if you get the elemental effect trigger on it, actually will make the enemy take 75% increase of damage. So if you stack that with like a burn or something like that, well, I guess not stack it, but if you stack it with a weapon that's doing a lot of damage, kind of how like I'm currently doing runs on stream where I'm trying to get the highest amount of crit damage possible in a single shot. If you have shock on an enemy, you're just upping your damage by 75%. So it's very important to try to get shock before you go for the crit shot to try to get as much damage in as possible. And once again, all of those effects happen if it happens to you too. So if you're under shock effect, you will take 75% more damage. And that's very important to know, because if you see that you're under shock, you can try to find some cover quickly or get out of the way, because you are going to die much faster than you'd probably like to. So yeah, those are the three standard elemental effects. Now let's go through what happens when you can combine them, because there are some pretty good combination effects, and I'll talk about which one's my favorite and why it's my favorite here at the end. But the first one is burning and decay. So this doesn't happen, this only happens if you inflict the elemental effect onto the enemy with both elements. So like we were talking about, there's a very important distinction between the fact that a fire weapon is always good against red bar enemies, but it doesn't always inflict its status effect. For this to happen, you can't just do damage with a corrosion weapon and a fire weapon. You have to inflict burn and decay. And if you do inflict burn and decay, you will trigger what's called explosion. And that sounds pretty self-explanatory because, well, it is. Basically, explosion just deals damage to enemies in an AoE type effect. So you just create an explosion every time you trigger burning and decay on a single enemy. And explosions in general are some of the best things in this game because of the AoE. Having the ability to clear multiple enemies at once not only gets you through rooms quicker, but it lowers your chance that you're going to be taking damage because there's less enemies to worry about. Overall, explosion is very, very good, and being able to trigger both of those effects, I think it's one of the more common ones to trigger because the enemy or the weapons you can get these effects on typically have higher fire rates or a higher chance to inflict their damage type. So having decay and fire cause explosion is not like a very rare thing. Like, you're gonna get that combo a lot. Next on the list is burning and shock. And burning and shock is kind of an important one to talk about because to unlock the last couple weapons in the game, you need to be at the last stage with burning and shock weapons. So it's kind of practical if you haven't unlocked everything yet in the game. And it inflicts something called manipulation. Now, manipulation, once again, these are pretty self-explanatory, but it will make an enemy stop what it's doing and look for the nearest, I guess, the nearest other enemy and start attacking it. So it's like a mind control type thing. And this is very good for a few reasons. Obviously, having an enemy just start dealing its damage to another enemy is never a bad thing by any means. And not to mention, that's not even its best, what it's typically used for. It would typically be used for just using it as a stun, because a lot of the times when it deals damage to enemies, it's not going to deal that much damage. Not enough for it to be like worth taking burning and shock just so you can have enemies fight each other. But the best part about it is all enemies stop attacking you. So, or any enemy afflicted by it stops attacking you. So if you have an enemy that's really causing you problems and you have a good way to cause manipulation, they'll just stop attacking you right then and there. And it's very, very useful. And once again, there's no reason, if you have a chance to get it, I would highly recommend it, because it's just so good at stunning enemies and getting them off your back. And then the last elemental combination we're going to talk about is Shock and Decay. Shock and Decay. And this is the only one that's not self-explanatory, because it's called Miasma. And Miasma is an effect that deals damage over time and is more effective against health, and it'll spread to enemies nearby. So Miasma is definitely interesting. It's kind of got the most going on, and it's one you have to kind of hear to understand what it does. So it deals damage over time that's more effective against health, not shields, not any type of shields, health. And it spreads to other enemies nearby. So if you inflict an enemy with it, it will continue to spread to other enemies that are nearby, which once again, that's never a bad thing. To just have all these enemies infected with Miasma. Pretty useful one. It's maybe not as flashy as the other ones, but definitely just as potent in the right build. So those are the elemental effect chances. Once again, for those to happen, you have to inflict the elemental effect and not just deal damage with the weapon that has the elemental effect. You have to get lucky and get a trigger on both. And it's when you get it, it's really, really good. All three of them are very, very useful. Specifically, once you get towards the last stage, it starts becoming even more potent and even better each time. So I'm going to go ahead and rank them. The effect chances, the infusion ones, not just the standard effects, but the infusion effects, and kind of give you what I think's my best and what I think the worst is. And worst I'm using very lightly here because none of them are bad, but I think some are more useful than others. I think the lowest on the tier list is probably Miasma. Yes, it does damage over time to enemies. That's good against health. But especially towards the end, very few enemies have no shield at all, which is where Miasma is most effective. So having enemies that have shields and stuff, you're going to be better off with most of the other elemental effect chances. And once again, Miasma is the Shock and Decay effect. The next one on my list is probably the Explosion effect, which is triggered from burning and decay. And that one, I think, just because it's definitely better than Miasma, because it's just an overall AoE explosive that is just going to do some flat damage to every enemy, no matter what kind of shield it's got, what kind of anything it has. And it's always useful. Miasma's just not as useful if you don't have if you have a shield of any kind. So being able to explode, clear out enemies is super good. And obviously now number one on the tier list is Manipulation. Manipulation is just so versatile, especially at the end of games, which is probably when you want your weapons to be performing the best, or your synergy to be at its highest, is at the very end when you're coming up on the third boss. Being able to stun enemies that are causing you problems is so good. And I just got destroyed there. It's so good, and you can use it on any enemy, and it's so important to have if you're going to be in the end game. Stunning pretty much any enemy in the last tier, because they're all pretty good, is so good. And not to mention, you need burn and shock to unlock some weapons if you don't have everything unlocked, so it just helps you do that as well. And on that note, Gemini Inscriptions, so there's nowhere to really show this, but there's a Gemini Inscription that says weapon 1 and 2 share a weapon type. If you have weapon 1 fire, weapon 2 lightning or shock, you get that Gemini Inscription, I would highly recommend always going for that Gemini Inscription if you have weapons that each weapon has a different damage type. If you get that weapon inscription, each weapon is going to be inflicting a fusion effect. So weapon 1 will have burning and shock. Weapon 2 will have burning and shock. So every single time you're hitting an enemy and you're triggering those effects, you're actually getting manipulation. You're stunning almost every enemy, and it's so good. So there's my quick guide to elemental effects in Gunfire Reborn. They are way more important than you'd think for winning runs, and can be very useful in determining what synergies you want to run. So thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. Once again, if you want to check these runs live, check the link in the description. Other than that, thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what kind of content you want to see, which roguelikes you want me to cover. And I love your faces. I'll catch you guys in the next one.